Hello and welcome to Newspeak. This is the NCF's weekly look at the news agenda. As usual, I'm joined by our senior fellows, Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, historian, royal commentator, and Dr. Philip Kiszely from Leeds University, and also a special guest who was last here about 6 months ago. This is John O'Sullivan, head of the Danube Institute, which is based in Budapest, and indeed he's been in London hosting a conference about the future of conservatism. Before, however, we talk about those subjects, just a reminder, we've got one of our locals events, which is happening in Reading this coming Tuesday, 27th of June at 7 o'clock. If you're interested, we've already had quite a few people coming back to us saying they're going to be coming. We've had a lot of crowds at the other ones. So if you want to join us, please do get in touch via events@newcultureforum.org.uk. Events@newcultureforum.org.uk. And yes, it's Tuesday, so maybe see you then. I want to start, if I can, with this big story, which is basically came about because two 13-year-old girls, a college in Sussex, recorded their teacher. I wonder if Rafe, you could start us off on that one. What actually was it that was the story?
Well, it's a remarkable story. I mean, in 2019 we had Rod Little on our show, and he wondered whether we had then reached peak wank, as he called it, in terms of woke nonsense. And I didn't quite believe it at the time. And I think we've been proved right over the last 3 years that we're far from reaching that peak, that peak moment. This is about a story of a teacher who described two children as being despicable because they wouldn't accept that a girl in their class was a cat. Now, yes, you heard me correctly. This two-legged girl was not a cat, and now that is enough to get yourself sent up to see the headmistress. And of course, you would think, well, this is clearly an aberration. This is, this is the heat getting to this teacher, but no, it's since been reported, and this has all come out through the Telegraph. It's since been reported that up and down the length and breadth of this nation, there are children identifying as horses, as a moon, not the moon. It's not like
moon,
insanity is saying that you're Queen Cleopatra in a past life rather than an Egyptian. This is a moon rather than the moon, and also a dinosaur. But it gets even more absurd because now it's also been reported, following on from that teaching assistants have been taking out children who think they're horses for a canter around the grounds. And in other cases, they've been feeding strips of meat to those who think that they're dinosaurs. I mean, I didn't think I could be shocked anymore. And I must say, there's a jaw-dropping moment to read a paragraph like that in a newspaper of record. And you have to think, this is where absurdity takes us, but this is the logical conclusion when you can start to have 101 genders. We've now gone from preferred pronouns to preferred species. It's an absurdity. And of course, I've long said for many years, that the two, people think that I'm exaggerating, but the two greatest threats to Western culture and civilization are mass migration and teacher training colleges. And it's not an exaggeration to say that, because they're actually producing the youth of the future. We have the most left-wing teaching body ever in history, but we also have the most left-wing generation of students in history. On every index you look at, they are far more left-leaning, and there's no coincidence, of course, when they're being taught and moulded over the course of 15 years of their life by these woke madrasas or teacher training colleges.
I think it's worth saying, actually, because this teacher, because we were having a good old laugh about this, but in this particular case, this teacher, the cold language that she used, which was sort of robotically ideological, that it's very sad. They said, well, our parents believe they're only men and women. Oh, well, that's very sad too. I think she said you need re-educating.
Yeah, I mean, this is you have to listen to the footage, to the audio, to really get a sense of her bovine stupidity, really. She doesn't understand.
That's anti-sheep.
That's anti-cow. She doesn't understand what she's talking about. It's like, you know, when police weigh into these Twitter spats, these identitarian Twitter spats, and they've got no idea what they're talking about because they don't have the training, and it's gobbledygook anyway because people are making it up as they go along. Okay, so she doesn't know what she's talking about, and on the one hand, it's really funny and it's absurd on every level. They're going out cantering around the field and eating. But on the other hand, it's incredibly disturbing because what kind of mental health issues are we storing up for these children? Okay, so she doesn't know what she's talking about, and the children are the grown-ups in the room. It's a complete reversal, isn't it? The children are the grown-ups in the room, and they're telling her what to think. They're actually treating her as though she's a bit of an idiot, and they're saying, no, we don't believe that. Surely we're allowed to say we don't agree, you know, and they're doing all of the freedom of speech stuff. That's one thing. There's something else. What's the next stage of this story, right? For me, the next stage is we're going to find out that teachers, teaching assistants are going to be identifying as the moon and God knows what, and you know, we're going to see, it's got to be, hasn't it? They've got to identify as all sorts of nonsense. It's not just going to be the children, it's going to be the teachers as well, because that's the water we're swimming in. So I think that, you know, children, when they look to the front of a classroom, they shouldn't be seeing either a clown or a monster, because there's a fine line between the two, an identitarian clown or a monster. They're children, for God's sake. They should be seeing a teacher, and they shouldn't be the grown-ups in the room.
Don't you think, John, I mean, I admire these girls.
Massively.
I would love more and more pupils to do this, actually.
And I think more and more people will do. But the girls you admire are the two who stood up and said, this is a complete farce, and you shouldn't be encouraging it, and so on. I'm interested in the other children.
Yeah.
I mean, what's their real motivation here? I know if it had been when I was at school, or if I'd been reading the books of Just William, or who were the Centrinians and that kind of thing, they would be pulling a huge fast one on the teachers, wouldn't they? But they don't seem to be. I don't quite get it, whether or not there is a kind of an entire closed, well, not closed-minded, but closed-mouthed children who are engaging in this fantastic impersonation of people who are, well, mentally not normal. But there is no doubt that as you say, the teachers are in the grip of what Lenin called infantile leftism. They themselves are adopting the latest nonsense. And I don't even think, Rafe, it's fair to call it left wing. I mean, it's a bit of a scandal.
Yeah. Well, it's radical. It's radical left ideology, but it's radical.
It's mainstream in schools. It's mainstream in the education. It's mainstream in the institutions.
Do you actually have any situations where people insist you say you call them by certain pronouns? Because that's all part of this same thing.
I've evolved a way of using language in which I don't use names or refer to people like that. You don't have to use pronouns when people are in the room, do you? So I just tend to say you, or, you know, it's just a way of, oi, yeah, get here. It's a way of circumventing all of this stuff.
But what about the psychiatrist question? I mean, does no one ever say, why do you think you're a cat? But I mean, that obviously would be casting doubt on the possibility that you were. But it's an obvious question, isn't it? Well, or what, even less hostile, what first made you realise you were a cat?
Yes.
And of course, well, Catherine Balsing has also spoken of someone who says that they're a hologram. Now, how a hologram, you know, you can understand, perhaps someone thinks that they're a cat and they have a glass of milk and a litter tray in the classroom or something, right? But you're a hologram, you still need to consume food, which obviously a hologram doesn't need to consume, so there are clear flaws here. But it's this coddling of
clear flaws here, really?
It's the coddling of children, you know, where now, of course, they can never ever be denied anything, and they can never be told that they're in the wrong. When we were at school, if we had told our teachers that you're a dog or a cat, you'd have got a clip around the ear, or the blackboard duster would have been hurled across the room at you, and you'd have been laughed at by everybody. But it's this coddling of children, and as you said, they are the ones who are now ruling the roost.
But just to, sorry, Peter, just to respond to John's question, I think there will be children who who will be really, taking the mick here. There will be children who know they're onto a good thing and they can get away with anything. But a huge amount of children, don't forget, they've been drenched in this since birth, and they don't know any different. If a teacher says that it's okay for you to be a cat, then it's okay for you to be a cat, because it's someone in a position of authority. It's someone in a position of power. Who are they to question that?
And it's
That's the really scary thing.
What about if you ask the question that follows logically on, like, for example, have you ever wondered what it would be like if you came into contact with the person whose hologram you are? Would it have any effect in the world of physics? Would one of you disappear? That kind of thing. I mean, it seems to me that if you were to treat it in a kind of solemn way, which is at the same time, inoffensive in a sense, but at the same time makes the person kind of begin to think either I'm engaged in a charade, or there's something wrong here deeply with my failure to see.
But the problem is, John, who would be making that point? Because I think Catherine Burblesing said there is no adult authority anymore. It's gone, right? So it's not in schools. And also the other point as well is, what about the parents? Are these kids doing this at home?
Well, of course, teachers aren't allowed to tell the parents now, are they? That's the whole issue. Whatever if you choose to dress up in your leggings in the class, the teacher can no longer tell the parents what you're getting up to in the classroom.
I think what was interesting with the footage, and when I was listening to those children, I could almost hear. I think what's happened is the children have gone home and said, "Look, this is happening in the classroom." And so it almost feels as though the parents have said, right, well, if they say this, then you respond in this kind of way, and you respond in this kind of way. The parents have taught them, I think, very, very ably and very, very well. If those parents are listening, you should be homeschooling, and I thought the girls handled it incredibly well, because I think they've been primed by that.
I think the serious side here, of course, is the damage this is doing to people's education, because it's so disruptive. I mean, I didn't like maths at school. I would have loved to have been able, when someone asked me a question, just to go meow at my answer, right? But that's what's happening now. People are meowing and barking their answers to people. But that's so disruptive to the rest of the student body who want to have a decent education. But, you can't, Poland and China are surging ahead with their schooling systems. Our schooling system is deteriorating in comparison to the G20, and we're making a mockery of ourselves by doing this. When stem cells, nothing's being taught correctly because we're having these meanders down into cloud cooking land.
Also, the other point is as well is that no adult authority, no parental authority presumably in these cases, but also no psychiatric authority increasingly, because the whole of sort of psychiatry has been infected with critical race theory and critical and gender theory.
And in a lot of ways, that's the really terrifying thing.
That's an utterly terrifying thing. Whatever you think of therapy, everything now has got to be seen through these prisms, hasn't it?
Well, it also is, of course, an absurd reflection of Soviet psychiatry in the 60s, where, if you said, they would say, don't you live in a perfect society? Isn't it? No, I don't, and I don't like it. Well, we think it's a perfect society, so therefore you are deluded, and we're going to lock you up. Bob Conquest once came up with the line, a proverb of détente, which was, I am not my brother's keeper. One is provided by the Serbsky Institute. And so you are living in a penal colony disguised as a school.
I think this is much more widespread than we think. I mean, Catherine Burblesing again said, this is, parents have no idea quite how bad things are in school.
I think that's the key point to the whole thing, right? Because this has just blown up massively, and Rafe pointed out some of the extreme lunacy. I think we'll find this is going on. We kind of know it's going on all over the country. The point is, the parents don't know, so people do have to wake up. It was what I was saying at the conference, isn't it? People are lazy about this. They think, it's political correctness gone mad. It's much more than that. We're post-revolutionary, as we always say. Parents need to really wake up and think about and look into what their children are learning at school, and they need to make a stand.
And when you see the absurdity of some of the claims being made, a lot of this comes from YouTube, where people now children are watching adult kink fetish type things, which aren't pornographic, but they're people living as dogs and
Puppies,
cats now.
furries, I think.
Furries.
Yeah.
So children are now seeing this stuff, which is available freely on YouTube. That's influencing them. But once you realise how far they're being influenced by these things, it makes you even more appreciative of the fact that when they say that they're a female when they're a male, it's even more now likely to be a fashion rather than a true feeling.
I felt actually listening to these two girls, and by the general tenor of their voice and accent and everything, without wishing to make too many assumptions, what came to mind was Orwell's phrase in 1984 when he said, "Any hope there is lies with the plebs," and he used that word in the context of the book. I hasten to add, I'm not using it. But I sort of thought that it's actually going to be down to ordinary people who basically are not middle class people, I would say, actually, because they're too compromised. They'll go along with it. You know?
It's working class people, and the key phrase is common sense. You know, because that's frowned upon by the middle classes. Everything is critical theory to death. And we've all got to look at ourselves through identity lenses and prisms. No, get rid of all that. It's all nonsense. Think about reality. Rationality.
One of the reality, I mean, that brings us on to this next point, which I think is is connected. It's all connected now. But this is very interesting. It's something that's been bubbling away for a long time, Philip, isn't it? But there is this sort of schism that they say has suddenly arisen, but it hasn't suddenly arisen. That has come about because of Pride and the Pride Month, in relation to Muslim councils here and in America. Can you just...
This is a lovely story. It really is. It made me laugh out loud. And this illustrates... it's one of those things, on the one hand it's very, very funny, on the other hand it's quite tragic. But it illustrates the house of cards that is Identity Britain, and all you have to do is just touch it and it comes crashing down. So this is let me get it right. There's quite a lot that's going on here. There are so many apologies, I can't keep up with them. But this is the mayor of Kiszely in Yorkshire, and he is called Mohammed Nazam. And he attended a Pride event, and he was caught, by the camera, mugging to the camera. Everything's great with a great big Pride flag behind him. His religious community were up in arms about it. Okay, so he apologised and he said, "Look, this goes against Pride, goes against my religion," and he made this big apology. On the back of that apology, the council kind of went berserk, went for him and said, you can't say that. So he apologised to the council for apologising. Then, after that, the LGBTQI alphabet people got involved, demanded another apology from him, not learning from experience and what happens in life. He issued an apology to them as well. He may have issued apologies to more. He might have, apologised to his missus for all of this, for all I know. But he had issued an apology to them, and of course, they're not interested in forgiveness or anything like that. They're just interested in destroying people. So he is now the ex-mayor of Kiszely, and I suspect he's just staying at home and keeping his head down.
There's something as well as happened in America.
A similar thing has happened in America.
What is the area? It's in Michigan, which is very strongly Muslim, isn't it? And again, white liberals
this is to do with
thrown
education.
into a quandary. Don't quite know how to respond to this.
Well, what I find remarkable, I would love to actually ask liberals who are for mass migration, what did they think was going to happen? For 20, 30 years we've been commentating on the right about the incompatibility of the liberal mass migrants who are coming over here with those people who want to maintain Western liberal democracies. If those countries we can see around the world that have the most draconian laws on gay rights, on female rights and so forth, are the ones who are forming the large part of the migration policy, migration to this country. And you're seeing this classic example in Michigan, where liberals were voting for a majority Muslim council in order to poke one in the eye at the Republicans and Trump, and they've now gone ahead and banned all pride flags. And you think, well, what did you expect was going to happen?
And there's competing victimhoods, isn't there? There's one faction of the Liberals saying, you're all racist, and there's another faction of the Liberals saying, no, you're all anti-queer, and they're fighting, with each other. It's hilarious.
But how much do you think of a serious effect would this schism have, or will they just live with it? I mean, I can't help feeling that they will live with it, and it will be allowed to be there as just a simple conflict.
Well, they love their contradictions.
They live with
Yeah,
it.
they'll live with it, won't they? But not in the correct way, if I might put it this way. I mean, we all live with conflicts with our neighbours. I mean, that's what it means living in a free society. There's also, live and let live, easygoing and so on. And unfortunately, if you come here from societies in which these things are matters for vendettas and death cults, those people are not going to take to it so obviously. Now the question is, how do we actually take people who are, particularly those who are born here, who have strong religious opinions which clash with the sexual attitudes of a lot of younger Brits. How do we find a way of getting them to become liberals? Because in effect, that's the task which society's got, unless it's going to try to reverse immigration. One way of doing it, by the way, is obviously cut off the supply of mass immigration, because the fact is, if you're 2% of a population, you don't actually go around trying to change majority attitudes, do you? You just accept what they are, and because you know you can't change them, and therefore the only way you can live in the society is by accepting, and that can happen. And of course, other people get more tolerant. I understand how you feel, old boy, but now's not the time to say it, if I may say.
But the interesting thing, though, is that young Muslims have more conservative views than their parents' generation did, and that's what's interesting. If you look at young people as a whole, yes, they are more liberal. But when you actually look at ethnic minorities, and not just Muslims, I should say, you find the same thing also with Hindus and others. You have this, and of course, you say live with it, but British cities are becoming less white, and the larger the city, the larger the ethnic minority is becoming a majority. And so the irony is, of course, for decades, for centuries probably, gay people, for example, would flood from the small towns to the big city as being their place where they could live their own lives.
And now
but of course, now what we're seeing is London, which has been the great beacon of Europe for freedom, is now actually the most intolerant when it comes to women's rights, when it comes to levels of homophobia, also increasingly anti-Semitism. Why? Well, we know why. Because of the demographic change that's happened in those cities. Now we're seeing, of course, a rise in, the Metropolitan Police in London now have a witchcraft department because of the rise of witchcraft from Africa. We're seeing honour killings, acid attacks, anti-Semitism, misogyny, homophobia, all on the rise in these cities. That's a taste of things to come. I'm actually in many ways an old-fashioned liberal on many issues, and that's really the main reason that I've been concerned for so long about migration, was to ensure that we maintained and could retain those liberal values that took us centuries to achieve.
If apart from the solution of reducing the inflow so that the numbers in the society are not continually reinforced, and I accept your point that younger Muslims and younger people and all ethnic minorities tend to have a slightly grievance-flavoured attitude, which leads to these strong, forceful positions, which their parents didn't have, because they were grateful to be here, they had a sense of coming to someone else's country. They are the ones who felt they must adapt. Their children don't feel that, or don't feel it so strongly. So therefore, you have a permanent problem. And I'm curious as to what the answer to that is. I don't have one.
Well, there isn't a good answer to it. There's only a bad answer to it. And the bad answer is that we lose our freedom. Because we're not allowed to go. There will be no-go areas. You're not allowed to say this. It's happening. You're not allowed to do that, because if you do that, you actually put yourself in danger. So what people will do is just self-impose restrictions on themselves for their own safety, and that's that's
what the situation is at the moment.
But it's only going to get worse.
That's the question of a girl going out for a date. She dresses more modestly, so to speak. Let me put it that way. Okay. Well, that's one way of doing it. It's not a way that I think is sustainable in the long run, because there are so many people, including young Muslim women, who, and I'm not arguing against women dressing modestly. By and large, I liked the past. But nonetheless, I don't like people being forced to behave in a way that there's not their free choice without a good reason.
And particularly when it's the indigenous culture that's having to adapt, that should never be allowed. And of course, I mean, you're seeing that. Just look at the beliefs about apostasy. Now, a majority of young Muslims in this country believe that you should be put to death if you leave the faith. That's an astonishing thing to actually consider. Over half of young Muslims believe that being gay is wrong, compared to only 5% in the broader population. Now, it's generally, I think, too late for this country to try to tackle this in a proper, meaningful way in the terms that you're just describing. But Denmark has been doing it the most successfully in Europe, and the way that it's done that, because it's found that the more ghettoized communities are, the more likely they are to hold these extreme views. So they've been breaking up the ghettos. When you go to kindergarten and to primary school in Denmark, you can't have more than 30% of the school children of one particular faith. Therefore, I mean, of a Muslim faith rather. So the majority must always be present in school settings. Well, that's probably the best way.
But we're a long way.
Ideal,
we're a long way from that.
That
we're a long way from that in this country.
Oh yeah, but in terms of mainstream values being inculcated into people, that's the best chance you have of doing it.
There will come a point. Sorry, but there will come a point. You say mainstream values. You see, we might reach a critical mass quite soon where they're no longer mainstream values. I mean, London is already, that's the case in London. When I stood for the Assembly in 2016, we had what they called the donut, which was around it, people who'd vote for us, in this case UKIP or Tories. That has disappeared entirely within 5 years.
Well, that's why I say I think it's too late for this country. Where Denmark has left and right governments. The left-wing governments in Denmark are actually more conservative on these issues than the right-wing governments. One of the things, for example, is they force people to shake hands at citizenship ceremonies, whereas a Muslim male will refuse to shake a female's hand. You have to do that as a precursor.
That happened with the Princess of Wales recently.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. But I'm talking about Danish citizenship ceremonies. You're forced to do that. That's their way of saying. Now, I can't imagine that ever happening in this country because our governments are too weak.
All the stuff that you talked about, all of those things there that you were talking about, witchcraft, people not being allowed to go anywhere, women having to dress modestly. No-go areas. Lots of people, the point I made about education before, ordinary average people don't know this is going on in schools. Right, ordinary average people don't know this is going on in school in cities either. They don't know. They don't put these things together, and they don't, immigration, culture, behaviour, society, those things don't fit together in a box for them because they just don't think about it. Often they don't have to because it doesn't necessarily impinge directly on their lives, but it's going to. And this is why I'm so keen on this idea of education. Just this phrase, I've just talked about it over the weekend actually, but this phrase, educate yourself, is always thrown around by the left, isn't it? And it's an intimidation. We should actually be thinking about this very, very seriously, and we should be educating ourselves about these issues.
The thing is that one of the great dichotomies about all of this is, if you think of what we've been talking about today, we've been talking about these terrible things happening in schools, and we're talking now about intolerance on the part of Muslims. Okay, so where would you stand, right? You've got a situation, we've already had it in Birmingham. You've got a situation where you've got Muslim parents saying we don't want these gender ideologies being taught, and you've got them teaching in schools. Who would you line up with? Rafe, who would you line up with?
Well, that's a very tricky question, because had you asked me that question 20 years ago, I would have sided with the government and the schools, because at that point I would have been in support of the curriculum as it then was. Everything's gone to hell in a handbasket since then. It's very difficult. 2010, I think, was the peak of our civilization. Everything has gone crazy since then, and I don't know on whose side I would stand.
What about you, John?
Well, it's a hard one because the Muslim parents are often defending the traditional standards that were also part, though independently part, of Christian culture and post-Christian culture. So, I mean, I rally to whoever is defending the standards, which happen to be our traditional standards, but which are also what I would call conservative liberal standards. That is to say, they're an easygoing way of trying to get the acceptance of the common views we all share. And what you're saying to me, and I completely accept your point, by the way, is that it's very pious of me to say that, but the fact is, there doesn't seem to be a way of achieving that, and without, which isn't in some sense also offensive to us and brutal, and we have no means of knowing if it will succeed.
Neither, because we've already talked about the education establishment and how lunatic that is. But if you stand on the side of a Muslim kind of religious view of life, then you're going to work towards Islamism. So you've got to think about where that's going to go in the future, I would say, and I don't think any of those we've got a huge task of trying to create something new, and it's actually what you're talking about, John. But we can't go down the Muslim route because we're not Muslims.
No, but we could go down. Because it's not actually increasingly not just Muslims. It's also Christians, particularly in America. They've joined.
Alberta in Canada,
they've kind of joined.
I do appreciate that, but also there is, you've got to think about the future, and you've got to think about demographics, and you've got to think about how things are changing. I think you've got to divorce yourself from that, and you've got to create something else.
Yes, I think it's possibly the only way. To go back to your point, Rafe, about London. Yes, there was a survey done by YouGov 2015, and the people asked all over the country, do you think homosexuality is morally wrong? Morally wrong, not legal, morally. And most regions came back with about 15-16% of people saying yes, it's morally wrong, right? Except for London, right? Diverse, wonderful London, nearly 30%.
Wow.
That was in 2015.
Think how much it'll be now. Yeah.
So the thing is, what we're really all admitting by this is that I feel that people should never have been put in this position of having to choose.
No.
Of course.
And nobody voted
Never.
for it. Nobody voted to be put in this position. That's the key thing.
And what we were told by the ministers in charge of immigration, really from Blair onwards, was a set of soothing platitudes, which have turned out to be, which were false anyway in the first place, and have turned out to point us in the wrong direction. So,
I mean, what they said was diversity will breed acceptance, and we're beginning to see that precisely the opposite is happening.
What, John, you've been this week hosting a conference in London, Recovering Conservatism. Do these issues sort of bulk large in the minds of people who are sort of worrying about conservatism or not? Or is it an economic thing mostly?
I don't think it's an economic thing. I mean, I think it's the kind of issues we've been discussing just around this table now, but also about those issues which have a distinctly national flavour. Questions of our history. Were we a uniquely racist slave trading power, or were we a country which, along with the rest of the world, had slavery, but in fact was the first to end it, and ended it worldwide? This, at the moment, is, I think, a key clash in our society, because it's a clash oddly, between the most highly educated sector of society, who cling desperately to a historically false account, and with the rest of the country, who know in a kind of in their bones kind of way that's nonsense. Look at the fact that slavery was abolished wherever the Union Jack was planted. Look at the cases where people would walk behind the Union Jack saying the flag that made us free. I mean, that kind of thing people know about, even though it's no longer part of official knowledge in British society. And the problem is that conservative governments, as well as Labour and other ones, it's hard to find people who really want to establish those truths in a clear and firm way. They think they're just to bring these questions up to fight against error is divisive. Well, unfortunately, what you're seeing is this is yet another example of the antinomianism, the collapse of all standards and rules, which is spreading everywhere, and which, of course, among other things, then breeds these passionate minorities which want to impose a very clear, firm, and alas, often mistaken standard.
This is a good example, like today, for example, Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, has been up to his usual tricks in making a speech in which he said, and he's not the first by a long talk to say this, in which he says, migrants and refugees built London, right? Now, the blowback, from people on saying, what are you talking about? It's an insult to the generations of people who were here before. And but isn't that a good example where there's not a single conservative voice raised to say, actually, you're historically wrong to say that? It's allowed just to rest.
Yes, why can't you say simply, you're talking complete nonsense.
Yes.
You're misleading people, and furthermore, it's offensive to the people who did build this country and whom you're denying any role.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, of course.
It's just that's all it requires. It doesn't require law
but
or anything.
It's so insidious and it's so widespread, this. I mean, we're talking today, you're talking about that story. I'll just throw another story into the mix, which has been published today by the BBC. And the headline was, "The Windrush Generation Made Britain Great." The Windrush generation, in the post-war doldrums, made Britain great. It's absurd. It's totally absurd.
But it's also, they're kind of waiting for you just simply to criticise or to say no. They're sort of, this is you're almost being set up with these kind of stories.
But we have to. It's incumbent upon us. It's our duty. We have to push back on this, and we have to push back with detail, and we have to say no, that's ridiculous. It's as simple as that.
Well, we know, don't we, from what happened in the Second World War, when the American army was forced to abandon its colour bar and its attempt to impose colour bar in English pubs by English working class public opinion, that they just blocked that. Now, that was 42, 43. 53, 54 is the Windrush generation. That's the arrival in considerable beginning of mass immigration into this country post-war. 1954, go forward to 67, and then you have a series of laws passed against discrimination,
Race Relations Act 1965,
all of those things. And the fact is, some of them may have been mistaken or have a misplaced emphasis, but they were a clear attempt by the society of this country to ensure fairness for everybody. And that's very, very important. Fairness is a very key English value. And we, I mean, I was talking about this to a Commonwealth Prime Minister recently from the Caribbean. And he didn't he wasn't shocked by what I said, and he realised this was practical reality. Of course, he has a sectional interest. He wants the people whom he used to represent to be treated well here, and he will always favour, I think, something that goes a bit further to do so. But the fact is that kind of openness and reasonableness and fairness is a key part of traditional English life. But I don't see it being replicated by the people who are pushing all these nonsense.
I think we've fundamentally changed, because what you're talking about there, John, is equality of opportunity, isn't it? And we're putting in place the building blocks, all of those acts that you were talking about there, 1965 Equality Act and the 1967 Sexual Equalities Acts, all of those things. It's equality of opportunity. That now has been turned on its head, as we know, and it's this fantasy of equality of outcome.
Equity,
which is what it's called, basically.
What do you see I mean, it's a big question, John, but I mean, given that you've had some pretty high-powered names at your conference today, there's going to be an election next year sometime, isn't there? I mean, do you go along with the Hitchens view that the Tory party, actually the best thing that could happen to the Tory party to be obliterated?
Well, the best thing to happen to conservatism is that the Tory party should be obliterated. Well, it's a paradox, of course, and I can see his argument, and anyone who's witnessed the extraordinary wasting of the opportunity of the last election result has to feel the Tory party deserves punishment for that. On the other hand, that punishment would involve punishing ourselves by having a government in which the kind of attitudes we've just been criticising and wondering why the government wasn't doing more about them, we would then find the government was doing more about them.
On
it was
steroids.
enforcing them, you know. And so that's something we have to think about. As a matter of fact, what I would most like is a period of electoral confusion in which no government had the authority to do that, while the right wing sorted itself out, and that does require, does actually require a realization that there are a lot of people who feel that. Many of them are very clever. The right at the moment, although electorally it's in a jam, it's more fertile in producing not just magazines and think tanks, but also more and more ideas. I was in Sweden last week, and I found myself talking to a group of young conservatives in Sweden who was their hero, Roger Scruton. So there is something going on.
But that makes it all the more tragic, though, doesn't it? Because we've got this incredibly intellectual, fertile intellectual landscape, which is totally disconnected from the Conservative Party. And I think it really is totally disconnected from the Conservative Party. I know occasionally, you know, we have people on here and there are very tenuous connections, but a deep intellectual and emotional commitment to what's going on intellectually, that's just not happening, is it?
Actually, people who support sort of what you might call insurgent movements or parties in Europe tend to be on the younger side. It's here where people are, younger people. And in fact, I think it was this week there's been a report out showing something which again we know, which is that they are on the whole left, and they're staying left.
That's
you know,
what,
they're not actually going on when they get their houses and whatever.
Well, Eric Kaufman produced some very important research on this at our conference, and of course it does have that pessimistic conclusion. But if you ask Eric, he'll point out there are some areas. One of them is the stress on fairness, which is still strong in the society, and the other is you've got to have a government that is prepared to do things like close down the Arts Council and start another one.
Exactly, yes. That was our very first report at the New Culture Forum about why it should go, and it's still getting, what is it, nearly £1 billion worth of government money. You know, it's not. To be continued. But in the meantime, John, thank you very, very much indeed for coming.
Thank you. Very nice being here.
Thank you for that's Newspeak for you this week. We shall see you next time. Thanks. Bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.